Hello and welcome. This is the Bits vs. Bytes podcast. I am your host, Ame Grigic, and today my guest is Stefan Leijnen. Could you tell a little bit about your background? So what you did before War Child and also what spoke to you about War Child?
Sure. So I have a background in artificial intelligence. Started with an interest in psychology, actually. Then I found out about this thing called artificial intelligence, where you can not only study the brain and how it works and the biology and the psychology and the philosophy, but also apply it in a computer and do experiments with it. So I moved into that field. I finished a PhD in machine learning on the concept of artificial creativity, which has nothing to do with my current work. It's interesting.
It's handy.
It's handy. And so I have a background in academia. I've been lecturing at Amsterdam University of Applied Science. I've been freelancing for a very long time, so I've done management consultancy, some agile workshops, developer also. So sort of picking up things here and there, learning here and there, all over the place. And then a lot of it centered around game development and around AI. And for the former, an opportunity arose summer last year at War Child, where we are building educational games for education of children in conflict-affected areas. And there was a new CTO position which was created, which wasn't there before. It was created particularly for this program to get more technical knowledge in-house. And so I applied. So now I get to work with game development, which is great. But I also get to work with data, infrastructure, all kinds of web technology. So it's a very interesting and very sort of wide palette of technologies that I get to dive into every day.
Yeah, and what's interesting about it is that maybe it's good to explain a little bit about what War Child does and what the mission is before we go into what your role is there.
Yeah, it's sort of a step to take to think about it. Starting from our vision, which is basically no child should be in war ever. Mm-hmm. So what War Child does is we work exclusively to improve psychosocial well-being for children who are affected by conflict. And so what we try to do is to boost the strength and confidence of these children who are forced to live with the effects of violence and armed conflict. Mm. So that's the way we typically work is through sometimes very creative like workshops, doing music, play, and dance to build a connection with children in our programs and to provide a safe space and to give children also a voice.
Yeah, and what would you say the type of organization it is? Is it kind of like a charity? Can I call it a charity, or is it a little bit more than that?
So. International NGO would be the term to use there. So if the word charity to me sounds like they provide exclusively donations. Yeah, and sure. Of course we are a charity in the sense that you can donate to War Child, but we also, of course, we implement programs ourselves. We work with partners who are implementing. So, yeah. So the context of that is that technology program like Can't Wait to Learn, which is the e-learning program that we're currently working on. It typically starts out as a smaller pilot, of course, because there's a lot of validation you need to do. It's about validating the type of education that we're offering within a particular context, also delivered by an NGO. So that's something that you start up small typically. So we started with that back in 2012. The history of the program goes way back. It actually originated from Sudan. Oh, right. So it's not even a program that was started by us, but we at some point in 2012 developed a pilot program to validate those assumptions. Later on, 2015, we had a more extensive, a more large-scale pilot also in Sudan, working together with universities there and other partners. And so 3 years ago, we had another scale-up step. And we were given the mission to enter new contexts, new countries, and also to not only build a mathematics game, which we had previously built, but also reading games for reading, also a bit of writing, and in the future, perhaps also other curricula like in English as a second or additional language. So as you scale up, you work with suppliers typically as an NGO, as you're not a tech organization. But as you scale up, you find that you need to think more about productization, about how do you manage and align all the suppliers, create roadmaps, etc. So at some point, you want to bring at least some of the tech expertise more in-house as part of your long-term strategy. So that's why this role was created, and that also sort of defines my sort of day-to-day work, which is a lot about thinking ahead and about working with our tech suppliers and making sure that everything is aligned.
Yeah, and what were the kind of challenges within that space? Because you said you started about a little bit over a year ago, right? What kind of challenges were there when you came in that you needed to face?
Yeah, so I started in August 2017.
Yeah.
One of the challenges was that we had a number of games in development. So to give you an idea, so we back then were working for games in Lebanon, Jordan, and Sudan. They were all different games, meaning they have a common core, they have some commonalities in the design, but the artwork, the videos that we produce, everything is, and also the curriculum, everything is fit for that particular context. So there were a number of parallel games in production, and we were about to release the first of those games and put them in a school and in a learning environment. And once you release software, that's when reality sometimes hits you.
Yeah,
so that was a very interesting challenge to begin with, of course, because that's the point where you suddenly notice where are your blind spots, what are the things you're missing. Not just in terms of software development, because that's of course also planned out well ahead, but also in terms of implementing. So you ship the tablets there, you have to install them at scale, you have to make sure they work, there needs to be support infrastructure. Those things have been thought about before we started implementing, but once you start doing it, is when you find out where your sort of blind spots and your weak spots. So I would say the first couple of months of that, so last year, was also making sure it's a complete program. So having those.
And also, maybe it was also about getting kind of an idea of what the whole inventory is, right? About the whole, what's kind of the whole environment that you're going to create. I think that's one of the things that you did, right?
What is the fit with the schools or the learning centers where we work?
Yeah.
So one of the things that I wouldn't have thought of ahead was, well, if you have those tablets in a school, you have to store them somewhere. You have to charge them somewhere. So you need devices, and schools don't have that typically. So you need devices and ship them to the schools, which not only allow you to store them securely and safely and allow you to charge them, but maybe also have some interaction with the devices, or have like a router on board, for example. And these are things that you can think of them ahead, but if you don't, you have to improvise. Yeah.
So the games that you have right now, they are in multiple countries at the moment, right?
Yeah.
So how is it still fixed to a particular country? The kind of games that you have, is it per country basis that you have like a game that works one way, or is it more standardized right now?
So I think there's two answers. The first is a technical answer, which is how our code base sort of is built up. There's a common core for all games, which include a certain logic. So the games are built up in the sense that we have what we call an overworld. So it's a big map with locations, with characters. Children can play around with that and then sort of enter a location, get a story. And then they enter a piece of educational content, which can either be an instructional video or a mini game, a short game. We have hundreds of different mini games. And each minigame has, of course, a set of questions that gets asked, because it's a curriculum that spans multiple years. So there's a lot of content, of course, that needs to be made. So the way we divide it up in the code base is there's a common core which deals with things like logging and saving, authentication of students, what is an overworld, how do you start and end minigames, etc. And then based on top of that, there are curriculum dependent libraries of videos and minigames. So we have a different set of games for, let's say, reading and writing than we have for mathematics, because there are different types of learnings. And then on top of that, we have the particular logic and art of that particular country. And so a part of that is all the art that is developed. So videos, all audio files. We have a lot of audio because the children can't read or write yet. So you have to do a lot with audio. Images as well. So we develop those. Almost all the content is developed in the country where the game is going to be implemented.
Yep.
So we have video studios, for example, in each of these countries who create the videos with children. So if a child plays a game, they see someone from their own country, their own context, and so there's a better match. So that's at the highest level of the code base. It's country specific, curriculum specific.
What's the idea behind that? So I can imagine that, of course, if you get into some kind of class like history or something like that, I can imagine that it kind of differs. But for example, for mathematics, it's pretty much always the same, right? What's the real reasoning behind it?
Well, so that's the interesting thing. It isn't always the same. It's what we find out.
I would say it was, but go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So one of our pillars are one of our part of our way of working is that we always work together with the Ministry of Education in a country because we believe that's the best way to do it and makes life easier. So we work together with the ministry and we also adopt the local curriculum.
Okay.
So, and of course, curricula differ, not just between math and reading, but also between countries. Each country has their own standard curriculum. So what we do is we have a number of steps. By now, it's really part of a process that we've discovered, where we gamify a country's curriculum. And of course, we can gamify them in ways that are similar to other countries. So not every mini game is developed particularly for a country. We can reuse mini games in different contexts. But the order of the didactical elements of the game, that's something that's sometimes different between countries. And that would, for instance, also probably be different in the Netherlands. So if we would develop a game like this for the Netherlands, we'd have to base it on the Dutch curriculum. Yeah.
And also the thing is you always have different languages as well, which you need to support. How do you go about that? So who does kind of the translations and stuff like that? Is that all done in the country itself or?
Yeah. So there's the sort of preparation phase where the curriculum is gamified. Mm-hmm. Then we work together with a Dutch game supplier for us. So that's Enrange, they're in Rotterdam. They build the game, they do the development, they do parts of the design, particularly the game design. But they then again work with local suppliers in country for production of the content.
Yeah. Okay, and what you mentioned the logging in as well. I was wondering about that because the kind of places these tablets and stuff like that are deployed. I can imagine in some cases don't have an internet access or not a stable internet access. So how does that work? Because you still want to collect all the kind of data that you get from that, right? So how does that work?
Yeah. So this is part of why this project is so fascinating, because we have to do these kinds of design challenges all the time. We have to work around these challenges. So one thing about logging in, of course, I thought you were going to ask about that, is how does a child log in if they don't know how to read and write?
Yeah, that's also one. Yeah, I didn't think about that one, but that's also
so there's a design challenge there where you have to create passwords based on images. So that's what we have now. But yeah, the other question also makes a lot of sense. How do you log in if you don't have internet? Yeah. So the way we do that now is of course, we're always in a managed environment. So we don't provide games directly to, let's say, a tablet a child would have at home or their parents would have at home. We're always in a learning center or a school environment. So there's a teacher present or a learning facilitator present. And what we do is we have our student administration portal, which you can only access if you have an online environment. So typically that will be at HQ or a country office, where you register the students. Registering the students gives you a student ID. And the student ID has a checksum number in it. So not every integer is a valid student ID. We create a list of names and student IDs, and we distribute that to the schools and to the learning centers. over there's no internet, or there's not always internet. So what they do is they create student accounts on the tablet with that given student ID. And now the game uses the same checksum as the student administration portal. So the game can check whether that's a valid student ID or not. If it is, then you can start playing. Then the game generates log files based on gameplay, sort of event logs. And those log files need to be shipped back to our student administration portal. Okay. Because we want to monitor the progress of the children for a variety of reasons. It's about program management. We're also doing a lot of research. Our donors want to know how the learning goes, what's the attendance rate, etc. So we need to have that information. So that information is then sent back to the server in a variety of ways. We can dive into this if you want.
Yeah, go ahead. About infrastructure, I want to know.
So imagine having this package on the tablet, right?
Yeah.
And then there's a server in the Netherlands. That's where the packet needs to arrive, right? That's where the database is. But we don't have internet. So what we do is we were sort of building on a catalog of connectivity options, and there's a whole range of options, of course. I mean, there's of course Wi-Fi, there's connected internet. Some locations you have that, others you don't. Sometimes there's mobile, it can be 2G, 3G, 4G. You could even think about more exotic solutions, and that's something that we're looking at right now. Like, can we do this with SMS, or can we do this with long-range Wi-Fi, which has a much bigger span than current Wi-Fi?
IoT maybe, or
yeah, I mean, well,
it's a little bit harder because of the package size, probably, but.
Well, the package size is pretty limited. I mean, we try to minimize that. So that's also part of course, providing a product for a sometimes limited infrastructure. And what we have to provide, of course, is a product that works in every infrastructure. So it's like a lowest common denominator problem. Yeah. You can't go for a solution that works in half of the infrastructure. You have to do it. It has to work everywhere. But in some contexts where there is a Wi-Fi available, for example, we've developed solutions that basically an application that you can install on a tablet that automates the sending of the packages like on a daily basis. So it becomes less manual work for a teacher or IT officer.
Yeah, so the what you're essentially saying is that so every student has their own tablet. Is that correct?
In some contexts they do. In some contexts we have multiple students on one tablet and they play in sessions on it.
Yeah. I was thinking about that. So essentially what you do is actually you kind of cache all those results that you have on the tablet itself, and then at a point where you do get internet or something or any kind of connectivity, you would be able to send it to your server, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and at some points we never get internet because there's simply no cables,
What happens then? Yeah.
So then we have someone who goes into a car, drives to to a village with a laptop, hooks up the tablets to the laptop, and we have a script which sort of gathers all the data. And I should also say that all the data packets, once they come off the tablet, they're PGP encrypted, and they're only decrypted server side. So everything that's transmitted in between is shielded off. So someone drives actually to a village, let's say somewhere in Sudan, collect all the data, drive back a couple of hours, sometimes even a day.
Yeah.
And then they reach a location where they have internet and they upload it to the server.
Yeah. And what are some kind of the other challenges that you have apart from internet connectivity? Are there other challenges that you mentioned the charging and stuff like that? So what kind of other challenges did you face as well in this kind of project to get everything working? Because I can imagine that even some remote villages don't even have electricity.
Exactly. Yeah.
So how does that work?
Yeah. Well, so you can do without internet.
Yeah.
Electricity is a lot of work. Electricity is more difficult. Yeah, with tablets. So you need electricity. So we provide solar power in some contexts. So we set that up. Also, another challenge is the charging cabinet that we use. We've been experimenting with that with different types of charging cabinets. Sometimes we ship them from a factory. Sometimes they get locally produced. I mean, there's different pros and cons and cost benefit.
Yeah, of course.
What we do find is that we're gravitating towards a solution which is really adapted to the context. And that means low cost, preferably locally produced, because everything we can do in country, you want to do in country.
Yeah.
And
it helps the country as well.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's our mission as well. I mean, it's part of our mission. It should be adapted to the environment. So you can imagine in some countries it gets a lot hotter than here, for example. So how do you? So you can either then go for a huge cooling fan, or you can design it maybe in such a way. So we've been thinking actually about using cloth to as a protective cover.
Yeah, to shield it. Yeah,
to shield it rather than because you need to keep the bugs out, literally bugs. You need to keep them out of the tablet cabinet. So you can use cloth for that, but cloth then at the same time provides nice ventilation as well. So, but these are designs that don't exist, or at least I haven't seen them around yet. So we're trying to come up with them as we go along, and trying to not only do iterative innovation on the game, but also on the whole sort of ecosystem of products that we have to deliver around that in order to have children playing the game.
Yeah, and what's kind of my question about that is that how do you do that? Because that's again that's even more different from just creating a software product, right? If you also need to think about the hardware and stuff like that. So this question is kind of twofold. One, the tablets, those are probably supplied by a general supplier, right? So I don't know if it's like Samsung or something like that, but and the other question about that is those boxes, as you said, they are locally produced, but who kind of designs those things? Is that something that you do in-house, or you work together with another partner or whatever?
It's typically not something that we would do, let's say, in the Amsterdam office. Yeah. We would always try to work together with local offices. We find suppliers there. We do requirement engineering, of course, because there's some requirements that we know of and some that we don't know of. Currently, we're working together with a university in Britain to help us aid in the design process, and then we're looking at a variety of options of producing that. So one would be to find a local supplier, do a tender, and then have them design and build it. Another would be to start up a competition locally, like a national competition, asking students to do the design and then having a supplier build them. So and the interesting thing is you can really sort of start integrating it as a larger product than we originally envisioned. So for instance, solar power could become part of this charging device. So we have like a nice package that's adapted to the environment that works well there, and it's something that we could have never come up with ourselves.
Yeah, so you could, for example, leave the box outside if it's a sunny country or whatever.
Yeah.
And it will automatically power itself and stuff like that.
Yeah. But then, if you leave it outside in a particular context, is it secure?
Yeah, that's a good one.
We're not always able on our end to assess that situation. So that's something that we typically would ask the countries to do an assessment like that.
Yeah, I was wondering about, so we talked about the electricity part, we talked about the internet part, but what are some other challenges that you have seen that you didn't think about beforehand? Are there any other ones?
Yeah, so my background is technology, right?
Yeah.
So I've been in the humanitarian world for a little over a year now. And what I've found so far is that the most interesting challenges, even though I'm a nerd and when I hear about blockchain, I want to know how it works, etc. The most interesting challenges are on the interface between those cultures, those like the humanitarian and tech. So whenever we start working in a particular context, we find that our assumptions, or some of our assumptions, were not valid. And so we have to find ways to work around that. So the connectivity is one, for example. I knew about mobile in Africa. It's big, like millions of users every month. But the way you integrate that, and that you could, for instance, ask a teacher who has a mobile to start doing the uploads, it's not something that we think about from the start, from the outset. It's something that you get to hear from the countries. Kind of challenge, maybe. It's not just a technical challenge, but I think there's a bigger challenge, which is to create a common understanding between those sectors.
Okay.
So
between the humanitarian and the technology. Right?
Exactly. Yeah. So from a tech perspective, you'd probably design the program in a very different way. Mm-hmm. And coming in from that perspective, you're sort of accustomed to think about scalability, efficiency. So the idea of developing different games for different countries, for example, you'd say, well, can't we just build one game that works in every country?
Yeah, that's what I thought as well.
Yeah. And then it takes a learning process to actually understand the context, understand the sector, understand the needs of, in this case, our children, our students.
Yeah.
I mean, it going in from the start that it's a good idea because people came up with it and people know what they're doing. But to actually create a full understanding of why it's such a good idea and sort of get yourself behind it, that takes some time to actually get to know the problem.
Yeah.
And I think that works both ways. I mean, for the sector, or maybe I should just talk about our program. For our program, it also took some time to think about typical technological challenges in terms of productization and scalability. So, of course, one of the things that as you start developing a program, start developing software, you need supporting software around that, and then it makes a program and the solution, so to speak, more rigid.
Yeah.
And so, how do you maintain flexibility? And I think it's a very general challenge in all IT and tech.
Exactly. Yeah.
How do you maintain flexibility if you're honing towards productization and scalability? And there's no one good solution for that, of course, but it's a continuous challenge. I would say almost like on a daily basis, we need to think about. We know what we want, we know where we're heading towards. We're working on it every day. At the same time, we need to stay adaptive and keep looking at potential opportunities to improve our product and to think about other products that would work, and not lose sight of our ultimate goal, which is to create a learning environment for these children who otherwise don't have access to learning.
Yeah, and so the kind of challenge is actually that you it's hard to understand on first hand or before you even start what kind of need there really is, right? Because you've learned that through kind of iterating through the things that you already done. As you said, you released to production, and then kind of the whole the kind of challenges came in after that. So it was after the fact that you kind of see other things. I can imagine how that is, because we did a product as well, and when we first released it, everybody was like, okay, this is really cool, but can it do this? And they were like, okay, yeah, it cannot do that yet. Yeah. it needs to be iterated.
Yeah, that's why they say, fail fast.
Yeah,
and then you learn fast. But then in a context where you're not allowed to learn to fail fast.
Yeah,
and you can't say, look, we're just testing this. Here, have your education, and we'll see if it works. No, it has to be quality education always. So within that set of constraints, within knowing that what you deliver is good, where do you find the agility? It's a very interesting challenge, I think. And it's really something that that I think you get when you come from tech and you enter a new context. I don't think it only applies to humanitarian context. I think it applies to other contexts that are typically not thinking about the same things as tech would.
Yeah. So would you say that, for example, if, say, for instance, people that were in humanitarian work for a long time, say they would create this kind of solution, let's take out the whole technical equation here, but that they kind of know about tech and they know what to do. Do you think it would be a different solution than what you have right now?
Well, that's very, very difficult to answer.
Yeah.
Of course. I wouldn't know. I think there's a reason why, and it's smart to at some point start looking, of course, outside your own domain for expertise.
Yeah.
I wouldn't imagine what it would look like.
The reason I'm asking is actually because technology is kind of a totally different thing than doing humanitarian work and knowing about that. So the reason I'm asking is actually because you have a kind of a fresh perspective on the whole idea. That's where the question kind of came from. What's also interesting to me is actually how do you kind of get all the input that you want to have and know what to change next? So do you have like channels that people can use, for example, the teachers, to kind of give you feedback on what could be changed? How does that work?
Yeah. That's one of the challenges, of course, is how do we get feedback? We work together with many partners.
Yeah.
Implementing partners, implementing in the humanitarian sense. So who work in the countries and help us scale. We try to leverage their knowledge as much as we can, because they are in contact with the teachers and also the children who play, and ask them for advice, feedback, issues that appear. I mean, we have a setup, of course, a typical IT support setup where we use Jira, like service desk. We have ticketing, and we have like reports, calls, etc. So we have this infrastructure set up. But sometimes we have to deal with teachers who are not connected to internet, who don't have electricity, who don't have an email address.
That's also
who don't speak English. So there's always some translation.
That's interesting that you say that, because say, for instance, those people that are working for you in those kind of countries, so the implementing partners, if you will, how does that go when you want to translate? Because I think it's hard to translate something that's from a non-technical perspective, to translate something into a requirement or maybe a feature that you want to have. How does that work? Do you have any difficulties with that, or?
So it needs to go both ways. So it's you try to meet each other. I think that's so. We as a team, we are used, and also the let's say the tech side of the team. We have trained ourselves and become used to understanding the context. So I think that's a really important part of our work, to understand the context, to know the people well that we're working with in the country. And also you need people who are able to make the translation themselves. So if you get feedback on a game,
that's the one.
Is this an issue? Is this important? That's something that.
Is it maybe a bug or? Whatever?
Is it? And that's something typically on, let's say, a product owner level, also on the developers and also on support, but typically where you have to make that translation. I think that's also one of the defining aspects of a good product owner. Is it's someone who understands the field, the domain, and is able to translate that to a technical requirement. But that's an extremely difficult job. I
do it every day.
So you know.
I know it's hard, because people will tell you, okay, I want this and this and this, but then you need to think about, okay, but how am I going to get this into an interface, or how am I going to create this?
And everything's important. Everything's a must if you ask users.
Everything's urgent.
So how do you? Exactly. How do you not only discern between the must-haves and the nice-to-haves, but also how do you keep your stakeholders happy? How do you keep them confident and they start trusting you? Instead of you get, as a user, you give feedback and you get turned down all the time. I mean, there's also sort of this stakeholder management part that's necessary for both.
So how big is the team that you have right now in the Netherlands?
Well, it depends on where you start counting. So we work with suppliers, and also even internally at War Child, it's hard to say, because you have like roles that are shared between departments, etc. But we have. I would say about 4 people working from a tech background. We have maybe 5-6 people working more from sort of design background. So all in all, I think the team will be 12-15 people at Amsterdam. And then, of course, we have suppliers.
For the software, for the games, and
and also, but also for the content and for the co-creation and design, and that's just the tech production. I mean, there's of course all different sides of running a program, finding partners, and the implementing partners themselves is a completely So there's the narrowest scope would be that team. I think a broader scope, and I think it's actually better to talk about this broader scope, because it's a very big team. There's hundreds of people involved in having the program running.
And you mentioned that it was a little bit before the recording, but you kind of get all the data in one place, so you get everything to the Netherlands, for example. So what happens to that data? You mentioned that you kind of I don't know if you kind of publish that to your donors as well, but what happens more with that kind of data? What kind of things can you do with that as well?
So recently we've moved to a different paradigm in collecting the data. What we had before is we had certain expectations on what we wanted to measure. Let's say a progress per child or attendance rates for a group. And what we did is we took the log files, or when I say we took them, this whole cumbersome process that I just talked about. We get them into the database finally, and then we create reports based on those based on that data. And the reports are used for monitoring, so knowing what's going on, managing the program, better game design. So game designers also would like to know like which games work best, which games children struggle with, etc. Research. So War Child, we have a great research department at War Child. Okay. So we create academic publications on the work we're doing, and also our donors want to know like what is going on, how's the increase, what are the results, etc. So we have to feed that back. So that's and then finally, of course, there's tech. So we have to support this whole tablet fleet. We have to know what's installed, what's going on, etc. So there's a number of questions coming from all these stakeholders. And what we did previously is do a transformation. So I upload my log file, I take from it what I want to know, and then I send that to these stakeholders and create reports. The different philosophy now is it's more sort of an event sourcing idea, where you store everything that comes in, you create a detailed log of what has happened over the history, so not just the latest knowledge, but everything. You have to be very careful with what you then collect in terms of privacy and also in terms of and so we have to adhere to all these policies, maybe even more than another organization because we're working with very vulnerable children. But then we have this history log on a very detailed level, and so we can start thinking and become more agile about what actually do we want to know. So it doesn't become just question driven from let's say someone who's in monitoring and thinks, oh, hey, I have to write a report. I need to know this number. Like how many children played the game last month in Lebanon? That would be a question they would ask. But what we can do now is actually have more flexibility and say, well, how many girls played in the last month in Lebanon? Well, that's a different question that previously we wouldn't get from the reports. But now we can look back in the history logs and we have this detailed information. So we have more granular access. We can do different reporting. Also, and this is something that we're let's say on the verge of exploring. So I think actually already next month we might have some results on this. We're going to do a feasibility study into predictive analytics. Mm-hmm. Given all these event logs, can we do some predictions? Now this is
it's hard.
I was going to say it's very hard. It's also extremely interesting from a tech perspective, but also from a sector, humanitarian sector perspective. Mm-hmm. What can you do with that? And with can, I mean not just technically, like what's possible, because of course there are correlations in the data, and of course we can apply machine learning and get those correlations out. But also what can we do for the benefit of our children? And so one thing, to give you an example that I think would be interesting to look at is dropout prediction. So rather than trying to predict maybe the outcome of a learning process, which could have some applications, but you have to be very careful with these kind of things because sometimes it won't be correct. And if you draw any conclusions on that, it might not be in the benefit of the child playing. So we don't want to do that if it's not in the benefit. But predicting the probability of a child dropping out, or better said, finding the indicators, and those could be in the gameplay, could also be the demographics of the child, etc. Finding the indicators of when a child is at risk of dropping out by itself doesn't mean much, but if we feed that to a teacher, for example, we could tell the teacher, look, in your class you have a couple of children who might be at risk of dropping out. We want to prevent that. It's up to you. You know better than us because
how to do it,
yeah, and also you know the children, we don't.
Yeah.
So you know better than us how to decide, but yeah, maybe be aware of that. This is how we came to that conclusion. Maybe you want to have a chat with those children to keep them in, and that's something that you can A/B test because that's something that's within the bounds of quality education. We have a human actor in the loop, so we have this sort of reasonable judgment that you sometimes don't get with machine learning and data mining. And then, it's something, like I said, it's a feasibility study. So we have to figure out if this is something that we want. Yeah. First, we're looking at, is this something that we can do technically? And then is it something that we want? But I think it's very interesting to move in this direction.
Yeah, because the teacher would have known. Well, it's not. When I look at it, it's not even just the children that you are trying to service, but that's in a broader sense in education would be interesting to see if there are kind of signaling points why a child would drop out or whatever, because then you can actually, not based on feeling, but based on some data that you already have, create like how would you say it? You could give a particular child maybe more attention because they need it, or something like that, right?
Yeah, for example, yeah. So I think the goal, because AI is hitting every field, it's also hitting education, and also not just in the context where we work, but globally. I think the goal shouldn't be to replace a teacher. I don't think. I mean, I've taught. I know that there's a lot more to teaching than just didactics, and but to augment teaching. I think AI as an augmentation tool is great in a lot of contexts. So, not just in a humanitarian context, but also maybe in a different educational context. How can AI be applied to make the life of teachers easier and to improve the quality of their education? I think that's a good question to ask at this point.
Yeah,
and it's interesting that we are in a position where we could also ask those questions.
It's something that I don't see a lot of in normal education, actually. These kind of studies and these kind of of tries to get to that. What I was wondering as well is that you've been working on this project for a little while now. What's kind of the impact that you see coming from that technology that you're bringing in right now? So how does it kind of prove itself in the real world?
So there's different levels. Of course, the primary level is we have over 8,000 children right now learning, which otherwise might not be learning, and it will help them in the future education. Sometimes in the case of refugees, if they move back to their original country, they might stream into different programs because of this. So there's the impact. There's a sort of a secondary impact, I would call it, which is, and I think it's research mostly which brings it, and that is knowledge building and expertise building in the sector as a whole. So that's of course also to the benefit of our program, but also to the benefit of any future program wanting to do e-learning.
Something like this,
something like this. There's so many learnings we could already sort of write up right now on the things that we do about what kind of tech do you need, what kind of design do you need, what kind of program do you need, and what are the results of particular choices that we made. I think just doing this sort of, it's not pioneering work because it's been done before, and of course, but it feels like pioneering work because we have to invent a lot of things for the first time. Doing it in a sort of pioneering way really feels like we can also contribute to future programs like this.
And how cool would it be, for example, that in a few years you kind of get to know someone maybe from one of those countries and say, oh yeah, that game, I can remember it because when I was a child I used to play it and stuff like that. That's the kind of the cool thing about it, right? So the impact that you can get.
And then the what seem like minor decisions that you make that we've already made at some point, where you say, oh, let's include this, let's not do that, let's have, for example, we have handwriting recognition in the game, so it's not just typing, learning to type. It actually we work. One of our partners is MyScript. It's a French company. They do handwriting recognition, and they donated their library to us. So we integrated it in the game. Yeah, because it's offline, right? So it has to work offline on tablet, real time, and then we use that for a variety of languages and also for math, etc. To allow the children, they have like this stylus pen to allow them to also write in the game. So that's, for us, this is a decision that we made a while back. Are we going to do this? Are we going to pursue this and include this? It seemed at that point like, well, not a minor decision, but it's just a decision you make at a certain day. Like, okay, let's go for it. Let's do this. To think about if we continue to scale and continue to be successful, what impact that might have in so many countries and contexts over the years to come. That's awesome.
Yeah. What do you think the future will bring in that respect? So for example, for the project that you are working on, is it more based on getting more countries involved, or what do you kind of feel?
So scaling is one, of course, and that would be more contexts, more countries, Also, of course, scaling within the countries where we are, numbers of children playing, schools. Also, productization in the sense that we this common core of game building that we have, we want to improve that, and we want to have those improvements impact all the games that are out there. So let's say we do a different type of game or a different type of change to the common core. We immediately can do updates on all the games that are out there and improve them that way. So that creates more scalability. But it's also in terms of organization. Like, to give you an example of another challenge, if you have 50 tablets, you just go to the shop, you buy them, you install your software, and you send
can
them
always update. And
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And now, if you have 10,000 tablets or 50,000 tablets, where do you buy them? How do you install them? How do you update them, etc.? How do you manage that fleet? Those are completely different questions. We've been asking them for a while to ourselves now, and we have some solutions. But that's a direction that we also will be moving towards more and more. Having partners around us, so not just implementing partners, but also suppliers, hardware, software suppliers that fit, but also grow with us. Yeah. I think that's on a management level, program management level. That's a challenge that we'll continue to face.
Okay, yeah, it's a lot of cogs in one big rig that you are kind of trying to build.
Yeah. That's, for me, that's also one of the maybe the most interesting aspect or fascinating aspect of it is, and of course that's an advantage of the position that I have. I get to see all the parts.
Yeah.
So from beginning to end, software, hardware, program implementation.
You kind of need to have a helicopter view of everything that's going on, right? I think that's primarily the role of any CTO that's working in a kind of technological space, right? We all need to have that kind of view of everything that's going on. We don't need to know everything in detail, but it's still kind of a helicopter view in that sense.
Yeah, and then seeing all those parts, those cogs, sort of working together as planned, working out nicely, and then it's sort of coming down to one tablet in the hands of a child playing a game, learning. That's really sort of a rewarding effect, rewarding thing to observe from knowing how many cogs are in there.
Yeah, so I have just one more question, and that's to wrap it up. I always ask this question, and I think what's coming. So you kind of touched on it a little bit before, but what are you kind of most proud of since you started?
Well, if you ask this question every time, I probably have the easiest answer, because for me it's just seeing these pictures and hearing the stories of children who are playing the game and who are happy playing it. Last week, we received a report from teachers in Jordan where we heard that children like coming back to school. So normally, like I said, dropout is a big problem. So you have children in your classroom and suddenly they don't come to your classroom anymore. That's of course.
That's scaling, yeah.
So hearing that the children and the teachers like the games, they like to play it, and children actually come back to school for that, I think that's something to be proud of. Yeah. Particularly, like I said, because knowing all the different aspects and work that came into it, and all the people who are involved and were involved, sort of seeing that as a whole, and then finally hearing about those stories. It's very easy to be proud of that. Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, I think it's cool to kind of have an impact on the world. Even if it's a few countries, it's already cool to kind of have that feeling of.
It's a fascinating aspect of having this. Yeah. This job.
Technology is a crazy thing in that respect. Yeah. So so to wrap up, where can people find War Child actually on the internet?
I would suggest Googling. Our program is called Can't Wait to Learn.
Okay.
There's lots of information out there, and if people are interested, feel free to just reach out to me. I mean, I'd be happy to answer their questions.
Sure,
I love talking about tech and about our program. But there's some good videos and information material out there.
Cool, very cool. And for the listeners, you can find the Bits vs. Bytes podcast on bitsvsbytes.com. We're on all major podcasting platforms, so Spotify, SoundCloud. iTunes and also Stitcher, TuneIn, basically everywhere. And of course on social media, it's all bitsvsbytes on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram.